recently promoted colonel in the Army was in his new office one day, proud of his rank, and he had a sense of elevated importance about himself. There came a knock at the door, and immediately he grabbed his phone and he said, "Just a moment," and he started shouting into the phone, "Yes, sir, General. I'll be glad to make that report to the Secretary, and if you need me to the President." He put the phone down and said, "Come on in." To his dismay, it was just a lowly private and not someone of importance. And he bellowed at him and he said, "What do you want, Private?" And the private looked at him and said, "Begging the colonel's pardon, but I've come here to hook up your telephone." There just seems to always be these superstars around us, the primaries, the luminaries, the ones that take precedence over everybody else. We call them second fiddles who are not these superstars. You ever wonder where that term came from? That notion stemmed? Well, it's the less vernacular Southern, another word for violin. The violin is an amazing musical instrument. And in an orchestra, the first violin chair is known as the concertmaster. And that position is second only to the conductor. Therefore, first violins are held in a very high rank and esteem. But there's also the second violin section, the second fiddle section, if you will. And what a difference it would make if we did not have the second violin section. So just as there are superstars and all those around us, there are a lot of second fiddles in our culture. Third fiddles, fourth fiddles, all the way through. The assistant principal, the chief financial officer under the CEO or the administrative assistant under the CEO. The executive officer of a ship, the chief engineer of a ship, the sailors on a ship. The associate director, producer of a play, the stagehands that bring everything together. The associate pastor of the church. Even the vice president of the United States. And how would you like to be in Kamala Harris's shoes these days? So our text today really does have a significant second fiddle. John the Baptizer. Now I say John the Baptizer because in the first century there were no Southern Baptists, there weren't any Methodists or Presbyterians either. He was a baptizer. He was known by what he did in that role. But he showed us in a very classic way and a very humbling and significant way about being a second fiddle. You know, John was an odd bird. The Gospels relay how he wore camel hair. And I'm not talking about those fine camel hair jackets that gentlemen wear. I'm talking about something that really looked like burlap. And he ate wild locusts and honey. I can imagine he had unkempt hair like Albert Einstein and a big bushy beard. He probably had a staring glaze and a voice like a trumpet. He was Jesus' cousin, and the two most likely grew up together. And other than what his mother or his Aunt Mary would relay, we don't really know how he came to know and believe Jesus to truly be the Messiah that he proclaimed. But the scriptures are very forthright that John had a very strong following, but he would be second fiddle to Jesus. Are you a second fiddle, a third fiddle, a fourth fiddle? Do you fill your place in the family, your role in the organization? Your very part in culture is never going to be a star celebrity. Maybe you prefer it that way. But do you ever feel minimized, negated, diluted? Well, I want you to hear this today. First of all, I want you to hear that there is an importance of second fiddles. You know, when John saw Jesus coming to him to be baptized, John said to Jesus, "You should be baptizing me." But Jesus countered, "Let it be so for now, for it is proper for us in this way to fulfill all righteousness." And John consented. He had an important role that day and in history. And so John fulfilled his role, his prophetic role, as the one to make a pathway for the Messiah to arrive, to prepare people, to prepare the crowds. And we just see a little bit of John in a few verses of Scripture, but he did a great work of preaching and preparing. You see, we need our second fiddles. If everyone were a captain, who would work the ship? If everyone were the CEO, who would make the products? Who would serve the customers? If everyone were principals, who would teach? Who would serve lunch? Who would clean up the school? Who would coach the teams? If everyone were a quarterback, where would all the other halfbacks and positions and linebackers be? If everyone were centers on the basketball team, who would serve the other roles? If everyone were a bishop, who would be the pastors and the conference treasurers? So, second fiddles are important. Then I would say, secondly, I would say this: second fiddles have a lot to contribute. Let's never forget that two of John the Baptizer's disciples, John the son of Zebedee and Andrew, went on to become followers of Jesus themselves. And it was John the son of Zebedee who brought his brother James into the fold. And it was Andrew who brought his brother Peter. Yeah, that Peter, to be one of Jesus's close 12s. But John's work cost him dearly. He was bold in our text today of challenging Herod in his marriage. Then there's a great debate over exactly among scholars what took place, whether Herod had divorced his previous wife in order to marry the current one, or whether she divorced Herod's brother Philip in order to marry Herod. Or Herod may have killed Philip. There's no understanding, but all we do know is this Herod family was quite devious, quite immoral. They would routinely kill each other over power or territories. They intermarried all the time. And every bit of that would go against Jewish law. And you remember the Herods, they were Jews. Not like Pilate, who was a Roman. The Herods claimed allegiance to Jewish. And John chastised them. And he did it publicly. So John met a very violent death as a result. Violence. Violence has for far too long been a part of our human experience. And yesterday we witnessed again an attack against former President Donald Trump. He was hurt, an innocent was killed, others were gravely injured. And from what I could see, a mere centimeters of that bullet that grazed him, we would be talking about an assassination today. As followers of Jesus, we embrace a life. We have to embrace a life against violence, against the evil that has become all too common. And John was one who suffered at that violence. But the violence did not silence John. Jesus, upon hearing of John's death, said, "Truly, I tell you, among those born of women, no one has risen greater than John the Baptizer." So whatever our place in society, whatever our place where we are found, we can offer contributions. We can step up when we're called to do the second mile, to turn the other cheek, to give not only our coat, but our cloak as well. And just because we may not be at large and in charge, It does not deny our responsibility or our youthfulness. You know, our own Methodist story is filled with the contributions of John Wesley. But let us never forget his younger brother Charles, who was with him all along the way and made phenomenal contributions himself. Charles was a great influence. And without Charles, we would not have the great hymns, Hark the Herald Angels Sing, Christ the Lord is risen today, or Oh, for a thousand tongues to sing. Our second and our third and our fourth fiddles, they make contribution. Then finally, I would say there is a necessity. There is a necessity of these second fiddles. Beyond what I listed earlier about who's going to do different things, we need these roles. John was a part of the plan of God. The angel went to his father Zechariah before he went to Mary to talk about Jesus. He went to his father Zechariah and foretold that John had a needed place in this new way. The prophet said his mission was the voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make his path straight. You know, I often think if it wasn't for John, the importance and significance we have on baptism as a Christian rite would not be where it is today. Rosa Louise was born in 1913 to James and Lenora in Alabama. She grew up in a small town near Montgomery and dropped out of school quite young in order to care for her grandmother and then for her own mother. But it was in one December afternoon in 1955, around 6 p.m. after working all day, she got on the 2857 Cleveland Avenue bus. In those days, like everything else in Montgomery, buses were segregated between the black people and the whites. And the front section was reserved exclusively for the whites. In fact, there was an ordinance of that all the way back to 1900. And as more whites would board, black people, black riders were either to move to the back, and if the bus was filled, they would stand. They may be even pushed out. So on this particular day, the bus was beginning to fill with some white riders, and the front seat Rosa occupied was demanded of her surrender. And she refused. The driver told her he would summon the police, to which she replied, "You may do that." Following Monday, after this had been heard around the town, the black community rallied and planned a boycott of the city buses because their ridership of population commanded 75% of the revenue. It was a highly successful venture. And it led to the creation of the Montgomery Improvement Association, led by the Reverend Ralph Abernathy. Yeah, that Ralph Abernathy. And Ralph was one who nurtured the blossoming leadership of a young new minister in Montgomery, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Many credit this one act as pivotal to launching the civil rights movement. So Rosa Louise Parks, she was not a Hollywood star, nor would she ever become an entrepreneur or a famous politician. Rosa would not ever be Martin Luther King Jr. or Ralph Abernathy or John Lewis or any of those. She once said, "People always say that I didn't give up my seat that day because I was tired. That's not true. I wasn't tired physically. No more tired than I was at the end of a regular working day. I was not old, although people sometimes think of me as being old. I was only 42. No, the only tired I was tired of giving in." It was a regular, ordinary person. But she was needed that day to fulfill a purpose And she did it with grace and honor. You know, Jesus himself modeled what I'm trying to talk about here today when he took a towel and a basin, even who he was as a first, and washed his disciples' feet. And he said, "For who is greater, the one who reclines at the table or the one who serves? The first shall be last, and the last shall be first." So second fiddles, third fiddles, fourth fiddles, they're everywhere. We honor them because they're important. We owe them because they contribute. We appreciate them because they're needed. Are you a second fiddle, a third fiddle, a fourth fiddle? Well, thanks be to God for you. And never, ever demise that or take it for granted. Amen.